will be able to answer your question. Okay, so I'll go ahead and get started here. What is the PIT? The PIT stands for the point in time count, and it occurs every year on a select day in January. This year it's January 24th. It's been happening since 2005, and the point in time count is a count of both unsheltered and sheltered individuals experiencing homelessness in the Chicago area. The data collected is used to develop a better understanding of the needs and inform how our community allocates resources for people in need. So there's a count of the unsheltered individuals and sheltered individuals experiencing homelessness. These both occur on the same night. Our data in HMIS is used for the sheltered count. That's why we'll be looking for updated information in Shelterpoint on this night of the PIT. Some of your agencies may already be talking about the sheltered tally. There's also a paper count of individuals experiencing homelessness in shelter that's going to happen at the same night, starting at 7 p.m. until about 10 is when the sheltered count should be happening. So at the same time as you are updating your shelter data that same night, January 24th, 7 p.m. to 10 p.m., you'll also have a paper tally count going on at your shelter. The two results are compared. So on the night of the PIT, providers will be doing two types of data collection: paper tallies that include all clients that are currently enrolled at their project, and the HMIS Shelterpoint data, which will be automatically pulled at midnight. To prepare for that data download at midnight, providers should ensure that Shelterpoint lists are reflective of who is staying on that night. That's the context of what we're talking about here, and when I get to demonstrations, I'll be showing you how to make sure that there's a reflection between who's checked in and who's checked in Shelterpoint. Okay, so the rule of thumb here then is that the number of clients on the tally sheet should match the number of clients in HMIS Shelterpoint. If you have any questions about that, go ahead and ask us a question in the questions box. Safe havens, transitional housing projects, emergency shelter, and interim housing will all be participating in the point in time sheltered count. Interim housing is not specifically acknowledged by our federal partners, but they're considered emergency shelter or transitional housing projects by the federal partners. I do have a resource to find your project type. If you're an ATA, for example, and you're wondering which projects at my agency need to participate in the count, I have a resource here that you can use to find out which ones qualify as shelters, transitional housing, or safe havens. I'll be sharing the slides with you. Okay, and what is Shelterpoint? It is the module and service point that allows clients to be checked in and out of beds. This data is used for tracking point in time count numbers as it reflects who is staying at shelter on the night of the point in time count. Okay, who should be in your Shelterpoint list on the night of the PIT? That should be anyone that's currently staying at your shelter, and that includes children. Families should have a matching group ID. I'll get to that a little bit later. And which demographic data is used during the PIT report? Demographic data that's used during the PIT report comes from entry assessments and includes the following elements: date of birth, race, ethnicity, gender, veteran status, disabilities, and chronic homeless questions. As far as what's in Shelterpoint, the data will be used for all clients that are entered into a bed, and that includes any children or members of the client's household. Okay, so now I will get into the Shelterpoint demonstration. We'll talk about some troubleshooting and basic operations for ensuring that you have an accurate shelter point for the pit next Thursday. I'm going to go on mute for just a quick second while I switch to the other screen. This is a great time to drop in any questions if you have them, and I will be right back. Okay. All right, I'm just going to switch to the other screen here. This may take just a second. In a moment, you'll see my Shelterpoint screen. Okay, so here I have my Shelterpoint module. In case it's your first time using this for the pit, to access the Shelterpoint module is in the left-hand navigation bar on the left side of the screen, and it just says Shelterpoint. So I clicked on that. From there, I would want to select my provider, All Chicago, dash the project I'm looking for, which is Emergency Shelter. And then I'll click Submit. And what I did was go to the View All field so that I can see my entire list of beds or resources, and that way I'm also shown who is checked in to those beds or resources. Okay, so the first thing that I'll talk about doing is a pretty common operation, and that is checking in a single individual. Just showing you what I'm going to go through here. These are the basic actions in Shelterpoint: checking in a single client, checking out a single client, and then checking in a multi-person household. I'm going to go through how to do each of those things. Also, in the slides, we have videos walking through these same steps. Definitely utilize those, especially next week if you have any questions on how to do these basic things. I'm going to show you right now, and we have resources on our help desk on the home page of HMIS, and I'll also be sharing these slides to you. Multiple places where you can find out how to make your Shelterpoint count accurate. Okay, so let me continue here, and I'm going to check in a single client. So I'm going to look for a available unit, available bed from this unit list, and this one says empty. So what I'm going to do is click the check-in icon on far left. That takes me to where I can search for the client that I'm checking in, and I'm going to search by first name and last name for my client named Theo Epstein. I can also search for the client's ID number if I happened to know that number exactly. I'm going to click search to find my client, and the results have come up here. So to keep checking this client in, I'm just going to click the plus sign next to the client's name, and then that takes me to this data entry form where I'm entering all the things about this client's check-in to that resource that was available. Okay, so the date in at the very top here, this can be updated to reflect the reality of when this client checked in. Within a day or two, I can change this date if I needed to. Underneath here, where it says on premises. I believe this will default to a yes. If you see a no here, go ahead and change that to a yes to indicate that the client is on the premises. Exempt from curfew, this one defaults to no, and I'll go ahead and leave that alone. What I want to check for is that where it says unit name and number, that there is an assignment right here. So my client has been assigned 5th floor, suite 504, bed number 1. So I want to make sure that there's a specific assignment to a unit happening here. I can also enter in any supplies or locker number. That would be specific to your agency, totally on a case-by-case basis. Okay. Now in this middle section, I can see a breakdown of household members right here. And this tells me that my client is actually the member of a larger household. Since what I want to do now is check in a single client, I'm going to make sure that this client's name is checked and that at the top they have a unit name assigned to them. And if that looks okay, I'm going to click Save and Exit to just complete the check-in of this client. So once I click Save and Exit, I can see that my client, Theo Epstein, was assigned to bed number 1, suite 504, 5th floor. You know, these floor numbers and room numbers will be specific to your agency, but I want to make sure that my client appears on this list. Okay. I just checked in a single client. It's really just a couple different steps. Any questions, go ahead and drop them in. I'm going to check out a single client now. I'm going to choose the same client here. It's Theo Epstein, and they're at the top of my unit list, so I'll click Checkout next to their name. And there are less things to fill in here. I can actually update this date out if I need to change that to reflect when the client actually left. But I'm just going to mark whether the client returned any supplies they were given. Just leave that as a yes, and then click Save and Exit. So that's the step for checking out a client. Click the check-in button to access that client, and then same thing to check them out. Click the checkout button and then check them out that way. Okay, so if you can see here, and as you may have seen, my client was actually part of a multi-person household. So that's the next thing I'll do. I'm going to talk about what to look for in multi-person households for those of us that are on the line and do serve families. So just that last note there, checking in a multi-person household. One moment while I get set up for that. Okay, and you'll see my screen in just a moment here. Okay, share. All right, so you'll see my screen in just a second if you can't now. I'm at the top of my unit list where you can see all the available units at my shelter project. Okay. So I want to check in now a multi-person household. I'm going to show you exactly how to do that and what to look for that will tell you whether the household was set up properly or not. All my units are available right now, so I'll click on any of them. I'm just going to click the top one and check in a client. Takes me to client search. And my client, Theo Epstein, was part of a larger household. And so what I want to do this time is check in each member of that household. What I'm going to do is search for one of the clients in that household, preferably the head of household, and I'll click search, and I can see my client in the same client results there at the bottom, client Theo Epstein. Click the plus, and here is my familiar data entry field for entering this client. So again, with the date, I can update this to reflect reality. I'm going to leave on premises as a yes and exempt from curfew as no. I can see that something I was looking for last time is here, and that's a good sign. That's the unit name and number that's being specifically assigned to this client. Now, this just tells me about one member of the household. So as I scroll down, I'm going to see the other members of the household. And they all show up under household members. So what I want to do is make sure that each person in this household is checked in and assigned to a unit. So I'm going to click the check boxes to mark all the check boxes next to the names of every client in this household. And then on the right side, I'm going to press the assign unit button next to each client's name. That brings up the unit list, and I have to assign each person to a specific bed. So when I assign them, they're given a bed number, and that's really what I'm looking for here, is that each client has a bed number and a room number. So I'm going down the list and clicking assign unit on each of the names so that I can assign them all to a specific unit. This is what I have to do for multi-person households. You have to assign each person to a unit, so it should look like this. A unit assigned to each and every person of the household using that assign unit button. If I want to just do an extra check, I can look at the household members, households overview, and that will show me in a little more detail each member of the household. Okay, so this looks good now that each person has a unit assigned to them. I'm going to click save and exit and see what I have back on the unit list screen. And so each member of the household is here and they're checked in, assigned to a bed. The way that I can tell that this family unit, household unit has been set up properly is that each person shares a group ID and it's identical. So if you have a family or a group of people that are presenting for services together as a household, then they have to have this group ID so that it's clear that they have in common between them one household, so they're in the same household. All right. So that covers my first couple things that I want to show you in this webinar. I'm just going to go back to my slide deck for a second here. So we checked in a single client and checked out a single client. And then now you know the things that you're looking for a multi-person household. Okay, so I'm going to go into some common scenarios you might run into now as you're looking to correct or update your Shelterpoint list. And that is exiting multiple clients. You might need to exit clients that are part of a household. And I'll also show you how to troubleshoot when clients have multiple household IDs, and I'll show the difference between checking out of a unit and exiting from the project. So one moment while I get set up for that. These are the things we're going to cover. All right, so you should see my screen in just a moment here, and I have the same family setup that we just saw with each person checked in to a unit, and they're part of the same household. So I do know that each member of this household is a household. They're presenting for services together, and in HMIS they are appearing to be one household. Okay. So Theo Epstein, Leonard Cohen, Creed Apollo, Dale, Baby Epstein, and Get Things Done. These are all members of the same household. Something is wrong here though. And if you look at the group IDs for these clients, right now there are two different group IDs in the same household. And so I know that something's wrong here. Individuals that are in the same household should share a group ID. It should be the same for everyone. So the way I'm going to correct this problem is by checking out every member of this household and then checking them all back in at the same time on the same date. So that will make sure that each person in a household has the same group ID. In showing you how to correct this problem, I'm going to be showing how to check out clients from a multi-person household. So we'll kind of cover both of those things in one sweep. And let me know if there are any questions, okay? Go ahead and place them into the questions box that you have in GoToWebinar. So, okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started with checking out the multi-person household. And you'll see how that helps me correct the mismatched group ID issue. So I'm going to start with my head of household, who's Theo Epstein at the top here, and just click on Check Out next to his name. And here I have each member of the household. What I'm going to do is check the box next to each client's name, and you'll see that I'm unable to check the check boxes next to Baby Epstein, Get Things Done, and Dale's Foym. Also, it says they've already been checked out. So I know that there's an error going on here. These people are part of the same household, and so I should be able to check them all out at one time. The reason I can't access all those clients is because they have different group IDs. I want to correct that, so I'm going to check out all the members of this household that I can. That is head of household Theo, Leonard Cohen, and Creed Apollo, these three clients right here. So I'm going to check these clients out, and I have them all selected. So I'll hit save and exit here in the bottom right corner. And And there I have part of my household checked out. I know that these members are part of the same household, and so they should be sharing the same group ID. To make that happen, I'm going to check out the other members of this household. And here I can access each member of the household. So I'm checking everyone out. That's how I'm going to correct this mismatched group ID issue. Checking the box next to each person's name, and that's it for checking out clients. It's very simple. So go ahead and hit save and exit. Okay, now my unit list is empty, and I can check in each of the clients that are part of the households as one household. So I'm just going to click an available unit and then search for Theo Epstein, who I know was the head of that household. I'll search for this client, and then under results, click the plus next to their name, and I'm checking for the same exact things here, correcting the date if it needs to be corrected, making sure that this client has a specific unit and number, and then scrolling down, I'm going to check the box next to each client's name and move over to the right hand side where I'm assigning each client to a unit. So these are the same steps here. And by checking in each client that's part of this household at the same time, I'm going to correct that mismatched group ID that would show up as an error. Alright, so each client is assigned to a bed, and that looks good. It's exactly what I want. So I'll click save and exit. Let's see what I have here back on my shelter unit list. Okay, so I can see each client from Theo to Dale and things get done is checked in. They're assigned to a unit, they're assigned to a bed, and they have matching group IDs. This is exactly what I would like. Alright. So you may be wondering how this could affect your timeliness if you are to check out individuals from a household and then check them in. They're at different times. There's the case that I know from questions from other ATAs and case managers that not everyone checks into shelter at the same time. And so even though they're part of a household, they might have mismatching group IDs. How can I correct that error by checking everyone out and then back in and still keep my timeliness? I don't know if anyone here had that question, but it is okay to go ahead and correct group IDs in this way. Timeliness won't be affected in terms of the entry assessments for this client and in terms of the project start date that they have documented in Client Point in HMIS. I'm going to go a little bit deeper for the rest of this webinar into some of the data elements that are being used for the PIT. So I'll go on mute for just a second while I bring those things up. Alright, so you may have seen a little bit of that. What I'm going to talk about now is some data elements that might be missing that are actually included in the PIT and how you can correct those. So if you can see here, my clients look good insofar as being assigned to a unit. They're all assigned to a bed, and the individuals that I know are part of this household also have the same group ID. Under the group ID column here, you can kind of see me highlighting it. Some elements I can see right away that are missing for my client Leonard Cohen are date of birth and gender. I'm going to go into one way you can correct those things if you see that they're missing within Shelterpoint here. So what I'm going to do is click on the name of the client that has missing data elements so I can investigate this a little further. I'm going to click on Leonard Cohen's name, and when I do that, it brings up this familiar screen that I use to check this client in. What I actually want to do though is navigate to the entry/exit tab. So this entry/exit is being used to find those data elements that I mentioned that are included in the PIT, the date of birth, gender, veteran status. I can get to some of those elements through the entry assessment for this client. So those of us that have done an entry assessment, this should look very familiar. What I'm going to try to find out is that whether this client has elements that are missing from the assessment done in All Chicago's emergency shelter. So I'm going to find the latest assessment here for shelter, and I'm going to click the pencil next to this client's project start date, their entry assessment. I'm going to click Save and Continue so I can enter this client's record. And here I can see that my client does have a HUD COC entry assessment. If I scroll down, there are elements that are missing. Client location is one of those. I'm going to correct that to Illinois 510. Date of birth I could see was missing within Shelterpoint. This client had no age, I believe, and no date of birth showing. So I'm going to go ahead and enter that. If my client is checked in, I should be able to get that information. Perhaps it's written down, perhaps it's in another assessment, but I can go ahead and make sure that it's not missing. And then I'll answer the data quality question, date of birth type. I have a full date of birth here. Another missing element was my client's gender. So I will answer this question here. And investigating a little further, you can see that the housing status question was not answered for this client. The other questions were, though, emergency shelter and length of previous stay. I'm going to answer the housing status question. My client is checked into emergency shelter, so they would be Category 1 homeless, HUD. Okay, so within the client's entry assessments, I can find some of the data elements that are being used in conjunction with the shelter count. Okay. Another thing I'm going to look at here is there's another household member listed on the left-hand side right here, and it says age 100. So I'm just going to take a look at that, click no so I can move on to this client's assessment. And this client too, Dale Savoyam, is missing a date of birth. So if clients are in the same household, I can pretty easily move between them and see which data elements are missing. If there are any of those that come up in the PIT, such as date of birth, primary race, ethnicity, and gender, along with housing status and veteran status, I would definitely want to answer those. So my client has no date of birth, it's missing. So I'm going to go back and enter what I have recorded. I'll make sure that the demographic questions are answered as well. All right. So I'm not going to go into the full assessment. That's an entirely different training. But I do want to show from Shelterpoint by doing exactly what I did then, clicking the client's name and then navigating to for your project. Okay, and I'm just scrolling all the way to the bottom here so I can click save and exit. Obviously there's a lot of things for this client since they are used in demonstrations. Okay. So I'm just going to click save and exit once again. And back on my unit list, my client Leonard Cohen now has the date of birth and gender assignment that was part of one of the paper assessments or another one of their project assessments. Any questions about that or getting to this data? Go ahead and drop them into the questions box here. You can also submit a ticket through the HMIS help desk as you're working through and looking at your Shelterpoint list. I also have a couple other sessions. One is on the 22nd, and on the night of the pit, I will be having, I believe, from 2 p.m. to 3 p.m., one last support session. And then, of course, we'll be working with agencies after the pit on various things, correcting data, things like that. Okay. So one of the last things I wanted to talk about is the difference between checking a client out from the unit list and exiting them from the project. So for our sheltered count coming up on the 24th, next Thursday, you will want to make sure that any client that's not receiving services on the day and night of the 24th is checked out of the Shelterpoint list. Along with that, if this client is someone that hasn't returned for services for a while, perhaps their check-in date is very old and the client is not there anymore, you haven't seen them, you would also want to exit the client. In terms of exiting a client from a project, you can do this as early as 2 days of no contact with the client, but you definitely would want to check out and exit a client that hasn't come back for services or you haven't heard from them in 30 days, 60 days definitely, 90 days definitely. Want to make sure that there's an accuracy between what we have in HMIS and what's going on at the agency. So the point in time count period is definitely a good time to look for exiting clients that haven't come for services and are not receiving services as well. So what I'm going to walk through is a recommendation that we have for checking out and exiting clients from the project. Okay, and so the client I'll work on is Leonard Cohen. And I'm going to say that right now Leonard is not checked in. It's the night of the point in time count. And this client is not present for services. They won't be staying that night. So I'm going to click the checkout next to that client's name. And they're part of this household. I'm going to make sure the checkbox is checked next to Leonard's name. And if that is the case, then I can go ahead and click Save and Exit in the bottom right corner. And so the unit that my client Leonard Cohen was in is now available. So that client has been checked out. I saw prior that the client had an entry assessment with All Chicago Emergency Shelter, and they haven't reported for services and they haven't checked in or stayed a night in a pretty long period of time. I'm pretty confident that I can exit this client from the project because they are not they're not here. no one would be able to contact them through my shelter. So I'm going to exit them from this project. Okay. I'm going to go and navigate to Client Point, which is in the navigation bar on the left side. And I'm going to search for my client, Leonard Cohen, by their name, first and last name. And they're showing up here in my client results. So I'm working my way through Client Point, and what I want to do is go to this client's entry and exit assessment. This is the same information that I was able to get to through Shelterpoint. It's the exact same. It's just that I checked my client out of the bed before searching for them again in Client Point. Okay, and so my client's project entry date was here. And I'm going to click the pencil next to their exit date, which is blank right now. And that's going to bring up the exit assessment for this client. Okay. So whenever I'm doing an exit assessment, if you're exiting a client like this, you'll have this window first, which asks for a reason for leaving and a destination for this client. So this is the subject of more discussion. So if you have any questions about what status is to pick for reason for leaving or for destination when you're exiting a client that hasn't returned for a while, definitely submit a ticket to the help desk or drop your question in here. We're open to talk about these things and what the different options mean. All right, and so I'm going to just have a look at the reason for leaving here. Completed program, disagreement for rules. If you conducted an interview with a client, like an exit interview, or someone was able to ask them where they were going, there's a documented reason why, use the most accurate choice here for the reason for leaving. My client could be someone that completed the program and they just hadn't been exited from Shelterpoint. Their name was still there, and no one had done an exit assessment for them. Perhaps it just slipped under, and this is the first time I'm entering that data in. So choose the most accurate and appropriate reason for leaving, and then for destination as well. Perhaps it was documented somewhere in an exit question, if that's part of your agency's workflow. Definitely open to questions about these different statuses, but mark the most accurate destination that you can for this client. Then click Save and Continue. Now this exit assessment has been brought up. I'm going to assume that there are no changes and just scroll to the bottom here and click Save and Exit. So now my client has an exit assessment, and I can tell because there's an exit date next to their name. So I'm going to go back to Shelterpoint now, and I'll be concluding the webinar in just a second here. And just a recap of what was covered here and what Shelterpoint walkthroughs we have in terms of video that you can refer to over the next week. We have the basic actions of checking in and out clients, and the same thing for multi-person households, which includes what to look for when checking in or out a multi-person household. We also just talked about clients with mismatched group IDs. So that would be multiple client households, and how to check them in and out and correct any mismatched group IDs Also, I talked about the difference between checking out of a unit list and exiting from a project. So our guidance on when to exit a client is as early as 2 days of no contact with the client, but definitely after 30 days, 60 days, or 90 days of not coming into contact with the client. You would want to exit them from the project and check them out of the unit list. I do have a video resource on that. So in the last few minutes, go ahead and drop in any questions. I'm just going to talk about what happens after the PIT very briefly. Then I'll go ahead and wrap up this webinar. All right, so after the point in time count, after January 24th, when we come back on January 28th, the HMIS team will be preparing a report of all sheltered clients. So the projects will be able to see the data that's pulled from their point in time report based on that night's data. And projects will have the opportunity to correct their own data. That's going to include filling in any missing information, connecting children to the rest of their family if there are child entries that are not sharing those group IDs that I was talking about. When the corrections are done, the HMIS team and Department of Family and Support Services will compare the totals between the HMIS data and the paper tallies that were done for the sheltered and unsheltered count. From there, the HMIS team will hand over reports to a third-party researcher. That is UIC. I believe it's Voorhees Center. There's a center at UIC, University of Illinois, Chicago. This third-party researcher is the one that prepares data to submit to HUD. That happens in the spring, the submission to HUD. And then the PIT report is generated and shared by Department of Family Services. That will be the summer of this year. Okay, and just as Paul sent a message to everyone, all the videos we have can be found on the HMIS help desk. Use that link or search for them on the help desk. I have 2 more PIT support sessions on January 22nd and then on the night of the PIT, January 24th. So you can find both of those here on the help desk and register for one of the sessions if you need. Okay, so I'll be wrapping up this webinar. Drop any questions in you have. Drop us a line through email or the HMIS help desk. And thanks for your time.